Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi there. This is part 2 of our Senate Bill 52 podcast. We're jumping right in, so visit episode 82 to catch up on the first part. Enjoy.
So kind of switching gears here, the other area where Senate Bill 52 is making some changes is in the area of having a decommissioning plan. So what does Senate Bill 52 require, and what does this entail?
You want to talk about that one, Eric? I know decommissioning is something that you've felt very strongly about, the need to have those provisions. And I've reviewed a number of leases that you and I have talked about that don't have a strong decommissioning element to them. So if you don't want to explain what we'll be seeing now.
Sure. And I really do like a lot of what's in SB 52 specifically as it relates to decommissioning, because it touches on some of the topics that, I think, Peggy, that you and I have been talking with landowners about to try and incorporate into their leases, right? So we've been trying to guide some best practices and, first of all, I guess at the highest level, so SB 52 is requiring that utility scale developers are submitting decommissioning plans prior to the construction of the facility. So they have to submit a decommissioning plan that's put together by an engineer and reviewed and approved by the Power Siting Board. So some of the things that must be in that decommissioning plan, and just to maybe back up one step. So as it is right now, some of the developers are already doing this, others are not. So if you go through and review the applications at the Power Siting Board, at one point I looked through and I think about half of them had submitted decommissioning plans of some type, but there's additional requirements now within those plans. So not only do you need to submit this plan, but it has to list all the parties that are going to be responsible for the decommissioning and kind of a timeline for when that's going to take place. It can't exceed 12 months. The other thing that's interesting is it's requiring an estimate for the full cost of decommissioning the facility. And this is interesting because in the past, we would see a lot of decommissioning cost estimates, but what they did was they would kind of outline, here's the cost, and then here's what we think our decommissioning revenue is going to be. And what that was is it was based on what they were expecting to receive for recycling, essentially, whether that's the steel of the racking or the posts. And in many cases, they were assuming a value to recycle the actual solar modules themselves. And so then they would kind of take that one step further and base a lot of the decommissioning bonds and costs off of what's referred to as a net decommissioning cost. So the actual cost minus the revenue. Senate Bill 52 doesn't allow that. So it's requiring that, we are looking at specifically just the cost of removal, the decommissioning cost, not including any salvage value of the materials. And then this decommissioning cost needs to be recalculated and estimated every 5 years. And so the important part of that is that recalculation of the decommissioning cost is kind of connected to the requirement of a performance bond that needs to be set in place. So SB 52 requires the developers set in place a performance bond for decommissioning before construction can start. And then that performance bond is reevaluated every 5 years as the decommissioning costs are. And if the decommissioning costs increase, then the performance bond value needs to increase as well. If the cost would happen to go down, the performance bond stays the same. So there's a lot more clarity in terms of what's required on decommissioning and the securities that are set in place to remove these projects. The other thing that I really found interesting in the language, and then I'll be quiet and we can hear Peggy's thoughts, but it requires that estimate for the full decommissioning of the facility, which is the disposal and removal of the components. But then it also goes on to say, and the restoration of the land which the facility is located on, to pre-construction conditions. And so I think that's an important part that starts to maybe take this from, decommissioning, which to me is just shutting the plant off and removing the components to more of a restoration, right? So remediating the land to its pre-construction condition. And I think the fact that that's in this legislation is good for landowners, and good for the industry, as the solar industry as a whole. As you look at, they want to be viewed as, how do we restore the land to production at some point in time, and hopefully this will help us get measures in place to do that.
Yeah, and you raised my concern with decommissioning, Eric, and that is that restoration of the land. I've reviewed many leases that just don't go there. They just don't fully address that need. And if we look at the life term of a lease, it could be that the generation that is making the leasing decision now is not going to be the landowner in the future who is dealing with decommissioning. And so my concerns have been on that future landowner who is now having to bear that burden, responsibility of removing that project, or ensuring that the developer at the time removes it in a way that can restore the land to its prior use, which in most cases is agriculture. So my hope is that these new provisions will help with that. I'd like to see a little more clarity on what is expected in that restoration component of the decommissioning plan, but I guess we'll see that as the Power Siting Board starts reviewing those decommissioning plans. But I'd like to ensure that, that all of the components are removed, not just, 3 feet below, and leave everything else in the ground, and that we deal with compaction issues and other kind of soil quality issues that could have arisen over the lifetime of that project. So my hope is these new provisions will get us to a better place in 30 or 40 years when those leases end and we want to return the land to agricultural use.
And I think that this could serve as a good starting point for a landowner, right, who's going through the leasing process and negotiating lease agreements with their developer. If they can point to this legislation and say, look, you're bound to estimate the decommissioning cost based on not only removing components, but restoration of the land, to pre-construction conditions. So let's end this lease agreement, establish baselines. So what is the pre-construction condition of this site? What are the expectations of restoration when the project's done? And, whether there's a a monitoring period. So, I don't know, you look at like some of the oil and gas pipeline standards where they have a monitoring period of, 3 years. So, and I'm not sure what the right number is, but I just think that this opens the door for landowners to have that conversation to say, look, legislation says you need to do that. Let's outline it. And here's our baseline. Here's our remediation process. Here's the monitoring period. And I suppose the last piece that would be missing from that is, is there a compensation model in place if we're falling short of the mark?
Mm-hmm. And remember, this new law doesn't apply to those leases that are already in place. And so we still will have, some of those uncertainties in the future with leases that came in before this October 11th effective date. Actually, projects that are in process within 30 days of that date are not subject to this new law. So we'll see a little bit of a dichotomy among leases in Ohio in regards to decommissioning.
Thank you guys for that overview. I really want to talk about what the future implications of this law are. As a public utility, as people become more concerned about using renewable energy, but also as we see more of our farmland, which we all know is a limited resource, being utilized for renewable energy. And I know you guys haven't had a lot of time to analyze this and look into it, but what do you think this all may have for Ohio, for landowners, local level, state level, as we move forward?
Right. That's a tough question. And I think the good thing about Senate Bill 52 is that it has created those conversations, the discussion, trying to look at this issue of renewable energy and also its impacts on agriculture from a state level, and try to create, let's all try to get on the same page here as to where we're going with renewable energy in Ohio. So that's the good thing. I think it still puts agriculture and renewable energy a bit at odds because we do create these issues of land competition. And as Eric said, these types of facilities take more land. They require more land than other types of power generation. And they also come down to us at a local level where now they're across the road, and we're not accustomed to that here in dealing with energy in that way. So it'll be interesting to see how we move forward from here with trying to balance those different needs and how much we can or should rely upon renewable energy in the future. And I know Eric has a few thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I've, as we talk about energy as a whole and the energy mix in Ohio, I've always kind of been on the side that's really looking at what is the right mix. I just, personally don't see a solution path that's 100% renewable. I struggle with that, and so, I think it's important that we really look at, multiple solution paths to the issues that we're facing related to energy generation. And yeah, renewables are certainly going to play a role in that. But as I think about the bill and the impacts of development, I don't necessarily see this as, some type of a bill that's anti-renewable. Does it change things? Absolutely. Is there going to be a break-in period that's maybe a bit challenging and causes some issues for several projects? Yeah, I think that you're probably going to see that. But I think that the implementing major policy changes, that's just the nature of them, right? You can't make major changes without having some type of an impact. But I feel like once we get through the process, you're still going to have opportunities for development. Local communities, local residents and leaders will have the ability to, protect certain areas of the community if they so choose. But, the developers, I think, eventually will have a little more security knowing kind of before they ever get to the power siting board that, yeah, we have local buy-in, right? We've already had that local meeting, at the county where this project's going to be. We've presented it to them. We've answered questions. We've had that dialogue, and ultimately they decided to allow the project to proceed. So it's not like you go through all of the work and you get to the siting board process and then you get a bunch of local comments that are opposing the project, and then there's a big debate then at that point. It allows them to kind of have that early on before they get more money wrapped up in the application itself and moving the project forward. So I do think that down the road it could be a benefit as well. And the other thing to remember as we think about renewables is it's not necessarily the siting that's going to solely drive the development or prohibit the development. There's other factors that impact that, right? So when I think of the energy mix, I think of resource availability, technology, economics, and then the P's, policy, politics, and public opinion. So we've talked about a couple of those right now, but the other ones that you need to think about are the economics, right? So when we look at the economics and the policy, those are drivers as well. And obviously the cost of solar has been dropping significantly over the last 10 years. And then, of course, there's policy and the investment tax credit program that, in 2019 was at 30% investment tax credit. Now we're in a 26% environment, but it's going to drop to 22% here in the future, and then ultimately 10%. So there's economic and policy implications that ultimately will impact how much of this development we see as well.
Thank you both for your time. This is a really important topic, and I think it deserved a little bit more time that we spent on it. I'm sure a lot of people listening are either interested in solar, have seen some solar projects going on. As you mentioned, Eric, there's a lot of them, may even be county commissioners. So if they have questions they want to follow up, where should they reach out to you guys?
Well, you can find my contact information on the Farm Office website, which is farmoffice.osu.edu. And my phone is there. My email, which is also easy to remember, aglaw@osu.edu. And that's the best way to reach me. Eric?
Yeah, so we have a number of resources on our website as well. The link for that is go.osu.edu/farm energy. And you'll find resources for a number of topics, including utility scale solar development. You can also reach me via email. My email number is my last name, so that's Romich, ROMICH, .2 @osu.edu.
And I mentioned to Amanda and Elizabeth that we are going to have some bulletins out that summarize Senate Bill 52 and the different parts of it. So Eric and I will be completing those. We hope to have them finished in time for Farm Science Review, and they'll be available there and also on both of our websites.
All right. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners. Just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.